On November 22, 1963, at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was fatally shot while riding in a presidential motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. This single moment would become one of the most analyzed, debated, and controversial events in American history, spawning countless investigations, theories, and questions that persist to this day. The assassination of the 35th President of the United States marked not just the end of a life, but the end of an era that many would later call Camelot, and the beginning of a period of profound skepticism about government institutions and official narratives. The events of that November day began routinely enough. President Kennedy had arrived in Dallas as part of a political trip to Texas, aimed at smoothing over tensions within the Democratic Party and preparing for the 1964 presidential election. The president was accompanied by his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, Texas Governor John Connally, and Connally's wife, Nellie. The presidential limousine, a 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible, had its top down to allow the crowds to see the president clearly. The weather was clear and sunny, perfect for a motorcade through the streets of Dallas. The route through Dallas had been published in local newspapers, making it public knowledge where and when the president would be traveling. The motorcade proceeded down Main Street, turned right onto Houston Street, and then made a sharp left turn onto Elm Street, heading toward the Triple Underpass. It was during this final stretch on Elm Street, as the limousine passed the Texas School Book Depository, that the shots were fired. According to the Warren Commission, the official government investigation into the assassination, 3 shots were fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository by Lee Harvey Oswald. The first shot allegedly missed the limousine entirely. The second shot, according to the commission, struck President Kennedy in the back of the neck, exited through his throat, and then continued to wound Governor Connally, who was sitting in front of Kennedy. This became known as the single bullet theory or magic bullet theory, one of the most contentious aspects of the official investigation. The third and final shot struck Kennedy in the head, causing the massive head wound that would prove fatal. The Zapruder film, shot by Dallas dressmaker Abraham Zapruder, captured the assassination in horrifying detail. This 26-second piece of 8mm film would become perhaps the most analyzed piece of evidence in the case, scrutinized frame by investigators, researchers, and conspiracy theorists for decades. The film shows the president's violent backward movement after the fatal headshot, which many argue is inconsistent with a shot fired from behind and above, as the Warren Commission concluded. Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine and self-proclaimed Marxist, was arrested approximately 80 minutes after the assassination. He was initially detained for the murder of Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, who was shot and killed in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas about 45 minutes after Kennedy's assassination. Oswald was subsequently charged with Kennedy's murder as well. However, before he could stand trial, Oswald himself was shot and killed by Dallas nightclub owner Jack Ruby while in police custody on November 24, 1963, just 2 days after the assassination. The Warren Commission, established by President Lyndon Johnson and chaired by Chief Justice Earl Warren, concluded in September 1964 that Oswald acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy. The Commission's report, running to 888 pages with 26 volumes of supporting evidence, stated that there was no credible evidence of a conspiracy, either domestic or international. However, this conclusion has been challenged repeatedly over the decades, with critics pointing to inconsistencies in the evidence, questionable witness testimony, and what they perceive as a rush to judgment. One of the most significant challenges to the Warren Commission's findings came from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was established in 1976 and issued its final report in 1979. This committee concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, though it was unable to identify the other gunman or the extent of the conspiracy. The committee's conclusion was based largely on acoustic evidence that suggested a fourth shot had been fired from the grassy knoll area of Dealey Plaza, though this acoustic evidence has since been disputed. The physical evidence in the Kennedy assassination case is both extensive and controversial. The alleged murder weapon, a 6.5mm Carcano rifle, was found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The rifle was traced to Oswald through a mail-order purchase he had made using the alias A. Hidell. 3 spent cartridge cases were found near the 6th floor window, and ballistics tests indicated that the bullets recovered from the scene were fired from Oswald's rifle. However, critics have questioned the chain of custody of this evidence, the reliability of the ballistics tests, and whether Oswald had sufficient time to fire 3 shots with the bolt-action rifle in the time frame established by the Zapruder film. The autopsy of President Kennedy, conducted at Bethesda Naval Hospital, has been another source of controversy. The autopsy was performed by military pathologists who had limited experience with gunshot wounds, and the procedure was reportedly rushed and conducted under intense pressure. Critics have argued that the autopsy was inadequate and that crucial evidence was either mishandled or destroyed. The president's brain, which was removed during the autopsy for further examination, mysteriously disappeared and has never been recovered. Additionally, the original autopsy photographs and X-rays were not made available to the Warren Commission, further fueling suspicions about a cover-up. The medical evidence regarding President Kennedy's wounds has been extensively debated. The Warren Commission concluded that Kennedy was struck by 2 bullets, both fired from behind. The first bullet allegedly entered the back of his neck and exited through his throat, while the second bullet struck him in the head. However, the Parkland Hospital doctors who initially treated Kennedy described what appeared to be an entrance wound in his throat, which would be inconsistent with a shot from behind. These doctors were later pressured to change their testimony to align with the official narrative. Governor John Connally's wounds have also been a subject of intense scrutiny, particularly in relation to the single bullet theory. According to the Warren Commission, the same bullet that exited Kennedy's throat went on to cause multiple wounds in Connally, including injuries to his back, chest, wrist, and thigh. Critics argue that this scenario is physically impossible, given the trajectory of the bullet and the positions of the 2 men in the limousine. Connally himself never believed that he and Kennedy were struck by the same bullet, maintaining until his death that he was hit by a separate shot. The timeline of events on November 22, 1963, has been reconstructed in minute detail, yet significant questions remain. The Warren Commission established that the shooting occurred over a period of approximately 5.6 seconds, based on the Zapruder film. However, tests conducted with the Carcano rifle suggested that it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for even an expert marksman to fire 3 accurate shots in such a short time frame. Oswald's marksmanship abilities have been questioned, as his military records show him to be only a mediocre shot. The behavior of the Secret Service on the day of the assassination has also raised questions. Several agents were reportedly out drinking late the night before, and there were unusual changes to the standard security protocols. The Secret Service agents in the follow-up car were ordered to stand down just before the motorcade entered Dealey Plaza, and the normal practice of having agents running alongside the presidential limousine was abandoned. Additionally, the route through Dealey Plaza required the motorcade to make a sharp turn that slowed it down significantly, creating what many consider to be an ideal ambush site. Witness testimony from Dealey Plaza presents a complex and often contradictory picture of what occurred. Many witnesses reported hearing shots from different directions, with some insisting that gunfire came from the grassy knoll area to the right front of the presidential limousine. Several witnesses reported seeing suspicious individuals in this area, including men who appeared to be armed or who fled the scene immediately after the shooting. However, the Warren Commission dismissed much of this testimony as unreliable or mistaken. The grassy knoll has become synonymous with conspiracy theories surrounding the Kennedy assassination. This elevated area overlooking Elm Street provided an excellent vantage point for a shooter, and numerous witnesses reported seeing smoke or suspicious activity in this location. Photographs taken immediately after the assassination show people running toward the grassy knoll, suggesting that many believed shots had come from that direction. Despite extensive investigation, no physical evidence of a shooter on the grassy knoll was ever found, though conspiracy theorists argue that such evidence could have been quickly removed or destroyed. Lee Harvey Oswald's background and motivations have been exhaustively examined, yet he remains an enigmatic figure. Born in New Orleans in 1939, Oswald had a troubled childhood marked by his father's death, his mother's instability, and frequent moves. He joined the Marines at age 17, but was court-martialed twice and received an undesirable discharge. Oswald defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, where he lived for nearly 3 years before returning to the United States with his Russian wife, Marina, and their daughter. Oswald's political beliefs were complex and seemingly contradictory. He claimed to be a Marxist and had attempted to defect to Cuba just months before the assassination. He was involved with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and had been arrested in New Orleans for distributing pro-Castro leaflets. However, some researchers have suggested that Oswald's pro-Castro activities may have been part of an intelligence operation designed to establish his credentials as a communist sympathizer. The question of Oswald's possible connections to intelligence agencies has been a persistent theme in assassination research. Oswald's time in the Soviet Union, his ease in returning to the United States despite his defection, and his subsequent activities have led some to speculate that he may have been working as an intelligence asset. The CIA has acknowledged that it had a file on Oswald before the assassination, but the agency has maintained that he was never an employee or agent. Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald has been seen by many as evidence of a conspiracy to silence the alleged assassin. Ruby, whose real name was Jacob Rubenstein, was a Dallas nightclub owner with connections to organized crime figures. He had been in financial trouble and was facing legal problems related to his clubs. Ruby claimed that he killed Oswald to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the ordeal of a trial, but many have questioned this explanation. Ruby's own statements about the assassination were often contradictory, and he hinted at a larger conspiracy before his death from cancer in 1967. The organized crime connection to the Kennedy assassination has been explored extensively by researchers and investigators. President Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, had launched an unprecedented campaign against organized crime, targeting major crime families across the country. Several prominent crime figures, including Carlos Marcello of New Orleans, Santo Trafficante of Tampa, and Sang Giancana of Chicago, had expressed hatred for the Kennedy administration and had both the motive and means to orchestrate an assassination. Carlos Marcello, in particular, has been identified by some researchers as a key figure in a possible conspiracy. Marcello controlled organized crime activities in Louisiana and had been the target of aggressive prosecution by the Kennedy Justice Department. In 1961, Robert Kennedy had Marcello kidnapped and deported to Guatemala, an action that reportedly enraged the crime boss. According to some accounts, Marcello made threats against President Kennedy and may have had the connections necessary to carry out such a plot. The CIA's relationship with organized crime figures in plots to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro has added another layer of complexity to assassination theories. The agency had recruited crime figures, including some of those who allegedly harbored grudges against Kennedy, to participate in assassination attempts against Castro. This relationship has led some researchers to speculate about a possible connection between anti-Castro activities and the Kennedy assassination. The Cuban connection to the assassination has been explored from multiple angles. President Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had angered both anti-Castro Cuban exiles and elements within the CIA, who felt betrayed by Kennedy's refusal to provide air support for the operation. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 further strained relationships, as some viewed Kennedy's peaceful resolution of the crisis as a betrayal of efforts to remove Castro from power. Anti-Castro Cuban exiles had both motive and opportunity to participate in a plot against Kennedy. Many of these exiles were trained in guerrilla warfare and assassination techniques by the CIA, and they had access to weapons and explosives. Some researchers have suggested that Oswald's pro-Castro activities may have been designed to implicate Cuba in the assassination, providing a pretext for an invasion of the island. The role of the CIA in the Kennedy assassination has been a subject of intense speculation and investigation. The agency's involvement in covert operations around the world, its use of assassination as a tool of foreign policy, and its conflicts with the Kennedy administration over various issues have led many to view the CIA as a possible conspirator. President Kennedy had reportedly threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds following the Bay of Pigs fiasco, creating a potential motive for elements within the agency. The CIA's McCulture program, which involved experiments in mind control and assassination techniques, has also been cited by conspiracy theorists as relevant to the Kennedy case. Some have suggested that Oswald may have been a subject of such experiments programmed to carry out the assassination. However, no credible evidence has been found to support this theory. The military-industrial complex has been identified by some researchers as having a motive to remove Kennedy from office. President Kennedy had begun to question American involvement in Vietnam and had reportedly planned to withdraw American advisors from South Vietnam after the 1964 election. This position put him at odds with military leaders and defense contractors who stood to profit from an expanded conflict in Southeast Asia. The relationship between President Kennedy and the Joint Chiefs of Staff was often tense, particularly following the Bay of Pigs invasion and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some military leaders viewed Kennedy as weak and indecisive, and there were reports of discussions about the possibility of a military coup. General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff, was particularly critical of Kennedy's policies and had advocated for more aggressive action against Cuba and the Soviet Union. The Federal Reserve and banking interests have also been suggested as possible conspirators in the Kennedy assassination. President Kennedy had signed Executive Order 11,110 in June 1963, which authorized the Treasury to issue silver certificates backed by silver bullion. Some conspiracy theorists have argued that this order threatened the Federal Reserve's monopoly on currency creation and provided a motive for Kennedy's elimination. However, most economists and historians dismiss this theory as lacking credible evidence. The investigation into the Kennedy assassination was hampered from the beginning by jurisdictional conflicts, political pressures, and what many view as a predetermined conclusion. The FBI, under Director J. Edgar Hoover, took control of the investigation within hours of the assassination and quickly focused on Oswald as the lone gunman. Critics have argued that this rush to judgment prevented a thorough investigation of other possible suspects and conspiracies. The destruction and alteration of evidence has been a persistent concern among assassination researchers. Key pieces of evidence, including the president's limousine, were cleaned and rebuilt before they could be thoroughly examined. The autopsy photographs and X-rays were controlled by the Kennedy family and were not made available to researchers for years. When they were finally released, some experts questioned their authenticity. The classification of government documents related to the assassination has fueled suspicions of a cover-up. Thousands of documents remain classified more than 60 years after the event, despite repeated promises of full disclosure. The JFK Records Act of 1992 mandated the release of all assassination-related documents by 2017, but significant portions remain redacted or withheld for national security reasons. The media's role in shaping public perception of the assassination has been significant and controversial. Major news outlets largely accepted the Warren Commission's conclusions and dismissed conspiracy theories as the work of cranks and extremists. However, as more information became available and inconsistencies in the official story became apparent, media coverage became more critical and investigative. The emergence of the internet and social media has dramatically changed the landscape of assassination research. Previously classified documents, witness testimonies, and photographic evidence are now widely available online, allowing researchers around the world to examine the evidence and share their findings. This democratization of information has led to new discoveries and theories, but it has also contributed to the proliferation of unfounded conspiracy theories. The psychological impact of the Kennedy assassination on the American public cannot be overstated. The event shattered the nation's sense of security and innocence, marking the end of what many consider to be a more optimistic era in American history. The assassination, followed by the murders of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy in 1968, contributed to a growing sense of paranoia and distrust of government institutions. The cultural impact of the assassination has been enormous, inspiring countless books, films, documentaries, and works of art. Oliver Stone's 1991 film, JFK, brought conspiracy theories about the assassination to mainstream audiences and sparked renewed interest in the case. The film, while criticized for its historical inaccuracies, raised important questions about the official investigation and the possibility of a cover-up. The scientific analysis of the assassination evidence has evolved significantly over the decades, with new technologies providing fresh insights into old questions. Computer modeling, enhanced photographic analysis, and advanced ballistics testing have all been applied to the case. However, these scientific advances have often raised as many questions as they have answered, with different experts reaching different conclusions from the same evidence. The acoustic evidence that led the House Select Committee on Assassinations to conclude that there was probably a conspiracy has been particularly controversial. The committee's analysis of a police dictabelt recording suggested that a fourth shot had been fired from the grassy knoll. However, subsequent analysis by the National Academy of Sciences concluded that the sounds on the recording were not gunshots, effectively undermining the committee's conspiracy conclusion. The photographic evidence from Dealey Plaza has been subjected to intense scrutiny, with researchers examining every frame of the Zapruder film and numerous still photographs taken by witnesses. Some researchers claim to have identified additional gunmen in these photographs, while others argue that the images show nothing more than shadows, reflections, or innocent bystanders. The enhancement and analysis of these images continue to generate debate and controversy. The ballistics evidence in the case has been re-examined numerous times, with different experts reaching different conclusions about the number of shots fired, their trajectories, and their sources. The condition of the bullets recovered from the scene has been questioned, with some arguing that they are too pristine to have caused the extensive damage attributed to them. The neutron activation analysis of bullet fragments has provided some insights, but has also been criticized for its limitations and potential for error. The medical evidence remains one of the most contentious aspects of the case. The original autopsy has been criticized as inadequate and potentially compromised, leading to calls for the exhumation and re-examination of Kennedy's body. However, the Kennedy family has consistently opposed such efforts, and the president's remains have never been disturbed. The testimony of the Parkland Hospital doctors who treated Kennedy immediately after the shooting has been a source of ongoing controversy. These doctors, who had extensive experience with gunshot wounds, described what they believed to be an entrance wound in Kennedy's throat. This observation is inconsistent with the Warren Commission's conclusion that Kennedy was shot only from behind. The doctors were later pressured to modify their testimony, leading to accusations of intimidation and cover-up. The role of the Secret Service in the assassination has been scrutinized extensively, with critics pointing to numerous security lapses and protocol violations. The decision to remove the bubble top from the presidential limousine, the failure to secure buildings along the motorcade route, and the unusual behavior of some agents have all been cited as evidence of either incompetence or complicity. The motorcade route through Dealey Plaza has been analyzed in detail, with researchers questioning why the route was chosen and whether it was changed at the last minute to create a better opportunity for an ambush. The sharp turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street required the motorcade to slow down significantly, making the president an easier target. Some researchers have suggested that this route change was made deliberately to facilitate the assassination. The presence of numerous photographers and filmmakers in Dealey Plaza on November 22, 1963, has provided a wealth of visual evidence, but it has also raised questions about whether some of these individuals had advanced knowledge of the assassination. The fact that so many cameras were present to record the event has struck some researchers as suspicious, particularly given that the president's visit to Dallas was not considered a major news event. The behavior of various government agencies in the immediate aftermath of the assassination has been criticized as suspicious and potentially obstructive. The rapid removal of Kennedy's body from Dallas, in violation of Texas law, prevented a proper autopsy from being conducted by local authorities. The cleaning and reconstruction of the presidential limousine destroyed crucial evidence, and the failure to properly secure the crime scene allowed potential evidence to be lost or contaminated. The international implications of the Kennedy assassination have been largely overlooked in most investigations, but some researchers have suggested that foreign governments or intelligence agencies may have been involved. The Soviet Union, Cuba, and various other nations had reasons to want Kennedy removed from office, and some had the capability to carry out such an operation. The Soviet Union's reaction to the assassination was one of genuine shock and concern, as Soviet leaders feared that they would be blamed for the killing and that it might lead to a nuclear war. The Soviets had been engaged in delicate negotiations with Kennedy over arms control and other issues, and his death represented a significant setback to their diplomatic efforts. Cuba's potential involvement in the assassination has been explored extensively, given Oswald's apparent pro-Castro sympathies and his attempts to travel to Cuba in the months before the assassination. However, most experts believe that Castro would have been unlikely to order Kennedy's assassination, as it would have provided the United States with a pretext for invasion. The Israeli connection to the assassination has been suggested by some researchers, who point to Kennedy's opposition to Israel's nuclear weapons program as a potential motive. However, there is little credible evidence to support this theory, and most experts dismiss it as unfounded speculation. The role of Texas oil interests in the assassination has been explored by some researchers, who argue that Kennedy's policies on oil depletion allowances and other issues had angered powerful business interests in Texas. Some have suggested that these interests may have conspired with other groups to eliminate Kennedy, but again, concrete evidence for such a conspiracy is lacking. The psychological profiles of the key figures in the assassination have been analyzed extensively, with particular attention paid to Lee Harvey Oswald's mental state and motivations. Oswald has been described as a loner, a malcontent, and a seeker of attention who may have seen the assassination as a way to achieve historical significance. However, others have argued that Oswald was a patsy, manipulated by more sophisticated conspirators who used him as a scapegoat. Jack Ruby's psychological state at the time he killed Oswald has also been examined, with some suggesting that he was mentally unstable or under extreme stress. Ruby's connections to organized crime figures and his financial difficulties have led some to speculate that he was ordered to kill Oswald to prevent him from revealing details of a larger conspiracy. The impact of the assassination on the Kennedy family has been profound and lasting. Jacqueline Kennedy's dignity and composure in the aftermath of her husband's murder made her an iconic figure, but the trauma of the event affected her for the rest of her life. Robert Kennedy was devastated by his brother's death and became obsessed with finding the truth about the assassination. conducting his own informal investigation before his own murder in 1968. The political consequences of the Kennedy assassination were enormous, fundamentally altering the course of American history. Lyndon Johnson's assumption of the presidency led to an escalation of the Vietnam War, the passage of major civil rights legislation, and the implementation of Great Society programs. Many historians have speculated about how different American history might have been if Kennedy had lived to serve a second term. The assassination also had a profound impact on American political culture, contributing to a growing cynicism about government and authority that would manifest itself in the anti-war protests of the 1960s, the Watergate scandal of the 1970s, and the general decline in trust in government institutions that continues to this day. The technological aspects of the assassination have been analyzed extensively, with researchers examining everything from the acoustics of Dealey Plaza to the ballistics of the weapons allegedly used. Computer simulations have been created to test various theories about the shooting, and advanced photographic analysis has been applied to the visual evidence. However, these technological approaches have often raised as many questions as they have answered. The legal aspects of the assassination case have been complex and controversial. Oswald was never tried for the crime, and no one else has ever been successfully prosecuted in connection with Kennedy's death. Various civil lawsuits have been filed over the years, but none have resulted in definitive answers about what happened in Dealey Plaza. The statute of limitations has long since expired for most potential crimes related to the assassination, meaning that even if new evidence were to emerge implicating other individuals, prosecution would likely be impossible. This legal reality has frustrated many researchers and family members who continue to seek justice for Kennedy's murder. The international investigations into the assassination have been limited, but some foreign governments and organizations have conducted their own inquiries. The British government, for example, has released documents related to its assessment of the assassination, though these have not provided any startling new revelations. The role of the press in covering the assassination and its aftermath has been both praised and criticized. The immediate coverage of the event was generally professional and restrained, but the long-term coverage has been marked by sensationalism, speculation, and the promotion of unfounded conspiracy theories. The tension between the public's right to know and the need to avoid spreading misinformation has been a constant challenge. The educational aspects of the assassination have been significant, with the event becoming a standard topic in American history curricula. However, the teaching of the assassination has been complicated by the ongoing controversies and conspiracy theories surrounding the case. Educators have struggled to present a balanced view of the evidence while avoiding the promotion of unfounded speculation. The memorial aspects of the assassination have been important to many Americans, with numerous monuments, museums, and commemorative events established to honor Kennedy's memory. The 6th floor museum at Dealey Plaza has become a major tourist attraction, presenting the official version of events while acknowledging the ongoing controversies. The psychological impact of the assassination on American society has been studied extensively by sociologists and psychologists. The event marked a loss of innocence for many Americans and contributed to a more cynical and suspicious worldview. The assassination, along with other traumatic events of the 1960s, helped to create what some scholars have called culture of conspiracy in American society. The generational differences in attitudes toward the assassination have been significant, with older Americans who lived through the event often having different perspectives than younger generations, who have learned about it primarily through books, films, and the internet. These generational differences have influenced how the assassination is remembered and interpreted. The role of amateur researchers and citizen investigators in the assassination case has been significant and controversial. Many important discoveries and insights have come from individuals working outside of official channels, but the field has also been plagued by speculation, misinformation, and unfounded theories. The democratization of research through the internet has both helped and hindered serious investigation of the case. The commercial aspects of the assassination have been substantial, with the event generating millions of dollars in book sales, film revenues, and tourist income. This commercialization has been criticized by some as exploitative, while others argue that it has helped to keep public interest in the case alive and has funded important research efforts. The philosophical implications of the assassination have been profound, raising fundamental questions about the nature of truth, the reliability of official narratives, and the role of government in a democratic society. The case has become a touchstone for broader debates about conspiracy theories, critical thinking, and the relationship between citizens and their government. The scientific method has been both applied to and challenged by the assassination case. While some researchers have attempted to use rigorous scientific approaches to analyze the evidence, others have criticized the limitations of such approaches when dealing with historical events and human behavior. The case has highlighted the challenges of applying scientific methodology to complex, politically charged historical events. The role of coincidence versus conspiracy in the assassination has been a central theme in many analyses of the case. Supporters of the lone gunman theory argue that many of the suspicious circumstances surrounding this assassination can be explained as coincidences, while conspiracy theorists contend that the number and nature of these coincidences make a conspiracy more likely. The preservation of evidence related to the assassination has been a significant challenge, with many important documents, photographs, and physical evidence deteriorating over time or being lost. Efforts to digitize and preserve this evidence have been ongoing, but the passage of time has made some evidence irretrievable. The international perspective on the assassination has varied significantly, with different countries and cultures interpreting the event through their own historical and political lenses. The assassination has been seen as everything from a tragic accident to a carefully orchestrated coup, depending on the observer's perspective and political beliefs. The technological limitations of the 1960s have been both a help and a hindrance to assassination researchers. While the lack of sophisticated surveillance and communication technology meant that less evidence was available, it also meant that any evidence that did exist was less likely to have been manipulated or fabricated. The contrast between 1960s technology and modern capabilities has influenced how researchers approach the evidence. The linguistic analysis of statements made by key figures in the assassination case has been conducted by some researchers, who have looked for clues about deception, knowledge, and motivation in the words used by witnesses, suspects, and officials. However, such analysis is inherently subjective and has not provided definitive answers. The meteorological conditions on November 22, 1963, have been analyzed for their potential impact on the assassination. The clear, sunny weather meant that the presidential limousine's top was down, making Kennedy more vulnerable to attack. Wind conditions and other factors have been considered in ballistics analyses, though their impact on the shooting appears to have been minimal. The architectural analysis of Dealey Plaza has been extensive, with researchers examining sightlines, distances, and angles to determine the feasibility of various shooting scenarios. The layout of the plaza, with its multiple elevated positions and complex geometry, has made it possible to construct numerous theories about where shots may have been fired from. The crowd dynamics in Dealey Plaza on November 22, 1963, have been studied to understand how witnesses reacted to the shooting and how their positions may have affected their observations. The behavior of the crowd immediately after the shooting, with many people running toward the grassy knoll, has been cited as evidence that shots came from that direction. The security arrangements for Kennedy's visit to Dallas have been criticized as inadequate, with numerous lapses and deviations from standard protocol. The failure to secure buildings along the motorcade route, the decision to use an open-top limousine, and the reduction in the number of security personnel have all been cited as factors that may have contributed to the success of the assassination. A political climate in Dallas in November 1963 was tense, with the city being a stronghold of conservative opposition to Kennedy's policies. Anti-Kennedy sentiment was high, and there had been incidents of harassment and violence directed at other Democratic politicians. This hostile environment may have influenced the decision to carry out the assassination in Dallas. The timing of the assassination, coming just over a year before the 1964 presidential election, has been seen as significant by some researchers. Kennedy's policies on civil rights, foreign affairs, and economic issues had created numerous enemies, and his removal from office would have had major implications for the upcoming election and the future direction of American policy. The aftermath of the assassination saw a massive mobilization of law enforcement and intelligence agencies, with thousands of individuals interviewed and investigated. However, critics have argued that this investigation was more focused on confirming the lone gunman theory than on genuinely exploring all possibilities. The role of informants and intelligence assets in the assassination case has been a subject of speculation, with some researchers suggesting that Oswald or other key figures may have been working for government agencies. The complex web of relationships between various individuals connected to the case has made it difficult to determine who, if anyone, was working for whom. The financial aspects of the assassination have been examined, including the costs of the various investigations, the economic impact on Dallas, and the financial motivations of potential conspirators. The assassination generated enormous costs for the government and had significant economic implications for the city of Dallas and the nation as a whole. The medical treatment of President Kennedy at Parkland Hospital has been analyzed in detail, with researchers examining whether different medical interventions might have saved his life. The doctors at Parkland worked heroically to save Kennedy, but the massive head wound he suffered made survival virtually impossible. The transportation of Kennedy's body from Dallas to Washington has been controversial, with critics arguing that the removal of the body violated Texas law and prevented a proper local autopsy. The decision to take the body to Bethesda Naval Hospital for autopsy, rather than to a civilian facility with more experience in forensic pathology, has also been criticized. The embalming and preparation of Kennedy's body for burial has been examined by some researchers, who have suggested that this process may have destroyed important evidence. The decision to have a closed casket funeral, while understandable given the nature of Kennedy's wounds, has also fueled speculation about the true extent of his injuries. The role of the Kennedy family in the investigation and its aftermath has been significant, with family members both cooperating with and sometimes obstructing various inquiries. The family's desire for privacy and their control over certain pieces of evidence have sometimes conflicted with the public's desire for a full accounting of the assassination. The impact of the assassination on Secret Service procedures and protocols has been substantial, with the agency implementing numerous changes in response to the security failures in Dallas. These changes have included improvements in advanced planning, threat assessment, and protective techniques, though some critics argue that the changes have been insufficient. The role of the Dallas Police Department in the investigation has been controversial, with critics pointing to numerous procedural errors and potential evidence tampering. The department's handling of Oswald's arrest, interrogation, and subsequent murder by Jack Ruby has been particularly criticized. The FBI's investigation of the assassination has been extensive but controversial, with critics arguing that the Bureau was more interested in supporting the lone gunman theory than in conducting an objective investigation. The FBI's relationship with Oswald prior to the assassination has been a particular source of controversy. The CIA's role in the assassination investigation has been limited and secretive, with the agency claiming that it had no significant information about Oswald or the assassination. However, the gradual release of CIA documents over the years has revealed that the agency had more extensive files on Oswald than it initially admitted. The role of other government agencies in the assassination and its investigation has been examined, including the roles of the State Department, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and various military intelligence units. The complex web of government agencies involved in various aspects of the case has made it difficult to get a complete picture of what each agency knew and when. The international ramifications of the assassination extended far beyond the immediate shock and grief felt around the world. Kennedy's death came at a critical moment in the Cold War, and his successor, Lyndon Johnson, faced immediate challenges in maintaining America's foreign policy commitments while establishing his own credibility as a leader. The Soviet Union's response to the assassination was carefully calibrated to avoid any appearance of involvement while expressing appropriate condolences. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, who had developed a working relationship with Kennedy despite their ideological differences, was reportedly genuinely saddened by the president's death and concerned about the implications for U.S.-Soviet relations. The Cuban government's reaction was similarly cautious, with Fidel Castro denying any involvement in the assassination while expressing concern that Cuba might be blamed for the killing. Castro reportedly feared that the assassination might be used as a pretext for a U.S. invasion of Cuba, and he took steps to prepare for such a possibility. The impact on America's allies was significant, with many world leaders expressing shock and concern about the stability of American leadership. The assassination raised questions about the security of democratic leaders and the vulnerability of open societies to political violence. The domestic political implications of the assassination were enormous, fundamentally altering the balance of power in Washington and changing the trajectory of American policy. Lyndon Johnson's assumption of the presidency brought a different style of leadership and different priorities, particularly regarding civil rights and the Vietnam War. The civil rights movement was profoundly affected by Kennedy's death, as the president had been moving towards stronger support for civil rights legislation in the months before his assassination. Johnson's commitment to passing Kennedy's civil rights agenda helped to ensure that major legislation was enacted, but the movement lost a potentially important ally in the White House. The Vietnam War escalated dramatically under Johnson, with the new president committing hundreds of thousands of American troops to the conflict. Many historians have speculated about whether Kennedy would have made the same decisions, given his apparent skepticism about the war in his final months. The space program, which Kennedy had championed with his goal of landing a man on the moon before the end of the decade, continued under Johnson, but with somewhat less enthusiasm and public support. The assassination occurred just as the program was gaining momentum, and Kennedy's death removed one of its most articulate advocates. The economic policies of the Kennedy administration were largely continued under Johnson, but the new president's focus on his Great Society programs represented a significant expansion of federal involvement in social issues. The assassination thus marked a turning point in American domestic policy as well as foreign policy. The cultural impact of the assassination extended far beyond politics, influencing art, literature, music, and popular culture for decades to come. The event became a defining moment for the baby boom generation, many of whom remember exactly where they were when they heard the news of Kennedy's death. The conspiracy theories that emerged in the wake of the assassination reflected broader changes in American society, including growing distrust of authority and increasing skepticism about official narratives. The assassination became a symbol of the loss of innocence that many Americans felt during the turbulent 1960s. The media coverage of the assassination and its aftermath set new standards for television journalism, with the networks providing continuous coverage for 4 days following Kennedy's death. This coverage brought the tragedy into American homes in an unprecedented way and helped create a shared national experience of grief and mourning. The funeral of President Kennedy became one of the most watched events in television history, with an estimated 180 million Americans viewing at least part of the proceedings. The dignity and pageantry of the funeral helped to provide a sense of closure for many Americans, even as questions about the assassination continued to multiply. The investigation into the assassination revealed significant weaknesses in the American intelligence and law enforcement systems, leading to calls for reform and reorganization. However, Many of these reforms were not implemented until after the Watergate scandal of the 1970s, when public pressure for government accountability reached a peak. The classification of documents related to the assassination has been a source of ongoing controversy, with researchers and the public demanding full disclosure of all relevant information. The passage of the JFK Records Act in 1992 mandated the release of most assassination-related documents, but thousands of pages remain classified or heavily redacted. The role of the Warren Commission in shaping public understanding of the assassination cannot be overstated. The Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone became the official version of events, but the Commission's methods and conclusions have been challenged repeatedly over the years. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, which concluded in 1979 that Kennedy was probably killed as the result of a conspiracy, represented a significant challenge to the Warren Commission's findings. However, the committee's conclusions were based largely on acoustic evidence that has since been disputed, leaving the question of conspiracy unresolved. The numerous books, articles, and documentaries about the assassination have kept the case in the public eye and have contributed to ongoing debates about what happened in Dallas. However, the sheer volume of material about the case has also made it difficult for the public to distinguish between credible research and unfounded speculation. The emergence of the Internet has democratized assassination research, allowing anyone with a computer to access documents, photographs, and other evidence related to the case. This has led to new discoveries and insights, but it has also contributed to the proliferation of unfounded conspiracy theories. The scientific analysis of the assassination evidence has become increasingly sophisticated over the years, with researchers using computer modeling, advanced ballistics testing, and other modern techniques to examine the case. However, these scientific approaches have often raised as many questions as they have answered. The psychological impact of the assassination on American society has been lasting and profound. The event contributed to a more cynical and suspicious worldview among many Americans, and helped to create what some scholars have called paranoid style in American politics. The assassination has become a touchstone for broader debates about the nature of truth, the reliability of official narratives, and the role of conspiracy theories in democratic societies. The case has highlighted the challenges of determining truth in complex, politically charged situations. The educational value of the assassination case has been significant, with the event serving as a case study in critical thinking, historical analysis, and the evaluation of evidence. However, the teaching of the assassination has been complicated by the ongoing controversies and the need to distinguish between credible research and unfounded speculation. The memorial aspects of the assassination have been important to many Americans, with numerous monuments, museums, and commemorative events established to honor Kennedy's memory. These memorials have helped to keep the president's legacy alive while also serving as reminders of the tragic circumstances of his death. The commercial exploitation of the assassination has been substantial, with the event generating millions of dollars in book sales, film revenues, and tourist income. This commercialization has been criticized by some as inappropriate, while others argue that it has helped to fund important research and keep public interest in the case alive. The international perspective on the assassination has varied significantly, with different countries and cultures interpreting the event through their own historical and political lenses. The assassination has been seen as everything from a tragic accident to evidence of the inherent instability of American democracy. The role of amateur researchers and citizen investigators in the assassination case has been both valuable and problematic. Many important discoveries have been made by individuals working outside of official channels, but the field has also been plagued by speculation and misinformation. The preservation of evidence related to the assassination has been a significant challenge, with many important documents and physical evidence deteriorating over time or being lost. Efforts to digitize and preserve this evidence have been ongoing, but the passage of time has made some evidence irretrievable. The legal aspects of the assassination case have been complex and frustrating for those seeking justice. The fact that Oswald was killed before he could stand trial has meant that many questions about his guilt or innocence remain unanswered, and the statute of limitations has expired for most potential crimes related to the case. The technological limitations of the 1960s have both helped and hindered assassination researchers. While the lack of sophisticated surveillance technology meant that less evidence was available, it also meant that any evidence that did exist was less likely to have been manipulated or fabricated. The architectural and geographical aspects of Dealey Plaza have been analyzed extensively, with researchers examining sightlines, distances, and angles to determine the feasibility of various shooting scenarios. The unique layout of the plaza has made it possible to construct numerous theories about how the assassination was carried out. The crowd dynamics and witness testimony from Dealey Plaza have provided valuable insights into what happened on November 22, 1963, but they have also created confusion and controversy. The fact that different witnesses reported hearing different numbers of shots from different directions has complicated efforts to reconstruct the events. The security arrangements for Kennedy's visit to Dallas have been criticized as inadequate, with numerous lapses and deviations from standard protocol that may have contributed to the success of the assassination. These security failures have led to significant changes in how presidents are protected. The political climate in Dallas in 1963 was hostile to Kennedy and his policies, with the city being a stronghold of conservative opposition to the administration. This hostile environment may have influenced the decision to carry out the assassination in Dallas rather than in another city. The timing of the assassination, coming just over a year before the 1964 presidential election, has been seen as significant by some researchers who argue that Kennedy's removal from office had major implications for American politics and policy. The aftermath of the assassination saw a massive investigation involving thousands of interviews and the examination of countless pieces of evidence. However, critics have argued that this investigation was more focused on confirming a predetermined conclusion than on genuinely exploring all possibilities. A role of various government agencies in the assassination and its investigation has been complex, sometimes contradictory, with different agencies having different priorities and different levels of access to information. This has made it difficult to get a complete picture of what happened and who knew what when. The financial costs of the assassination and its investigation have been enormous, running into the hundreds of millions of dollars over the decades. These costs have included not only the direct expenses of various investigations, but also the indirect costs of increased security measures and the impact on public confidence in government. The medical aspects of the case, including the treatment of Kennedy at Parkland Hospital and the subsequent autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital, have been sources of ongoing controversy. The adequacy of the medical care provided and the quality of the autopsy have been questioned by numerous experts. The transportation and handling of Kennedy's body after the assassination have been controversial, with critics arguing that proper procedures were not followed, and that important evidence may have been lost or destroyed as a result. The role of the Kennedy family in the investigation and its aftermath has been significant, with family members sometimes cooperating with and sometimes obstructing various inquiries. The family's desire for privacy has sometimes conflicted with the public's desire for a full accounting of the assassination. The impact of the assassination on Secret Service procedures has been substantial, with the agency implementing numerous changes in response to the security failures in Dallas. These changes have improved presidential security, but have also made the presidency more isolated and less accessible to the public. The role of the Dallas Police Department in the investigation has been controversial, with critics pointing to numerous procedural errors and potential evidence tampering. The department's handling of the case has been seen by many as unprofessional and possibly corrupt. The FBI's investigation of the assassination has been extensive, but has been criticized for being more interested in supporting a predetermined conclusion than in conducting an objective investigation. The Bureau's relationship with Oswald prior to the assassination has been a particular source of controversy. The CIA's role in the assassination investigation has been limited and secretive, with the agency claiming minimal knowledge of Oswald or the assassination. However, the gradual release of documents has revealed that the agency had more extensive files on Oswald than it initially admitted. As we examine the totality of evidence and testimony surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy, we are left with more questions than answers. The official conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing the president has been challenged repeatedly over the decades, with critics pointing to inconsistencies in the evidence, questionable witness testimony, and what they perceive as a rush to judgment by investigators. The physical evidence in the case is both extensive and problematic. The alleged murder weapon, the Carcano rifle, was traced to Oswald, and ballistics tests indicated that bullets recovered from the scene were fired from this weapon. However, questions remain about the chain of custody of this evidence, the reliability of the ballistics tests, and whether Oswald had sufficient time and skill to fire the shots attributed to him. The medical evidence, particularly the autopsy of President Kennedy, has been a source of ongoing controversy. The autopsy was conducted under unusual circumstances by pathologists with limited experience in gunshot wounds, and crucial evidence, including the president's brain, subsequently disappeared. The original descriptions of Kennedy's wounds by the Parkland Hospital doctors differed significantly from the conclusions reached by the Warren Commission. The witness testimony from Dealey Plaza presents a complex and often contradictory picture of what occurred. Many witnesses reported hearing shots from different directions, and some reported seeing suspicious individuals or activities in areas other than the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. However, the Warren Commission dismissed much of this testimony as unreliable or mistaken. The background and motivations of Lee Harvey Oswald remain enigmatic. His defection to the Soviet Union, his pro-Castro activities, and his possible connections to intelligence agencies have all been subjects of intense speculation. The question of whether Oswald was a lone assassin, a patsy in a larger conspiracy, or something else entirely remains unresolved. The murder of Oswald by Jack Ruby before he could stand trial eliminated the possibility of learning Oswald's version of events and has been seen by many as evidence of a conspiracy to silence the alleged assassin. Ruby's own background, including his connections to organized crime figures, has raised additional questions about the possibility of a larger plot. The various investigations into the assassination, from the Warren Commission to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, have reached different conclusions about whether Kennedy was killed as the result of a conspiracy. The fact that the government's own investigators could not agree on this fundamental question has contributed to ongoing public skepticism about the official narrative. The classification of thousands of documents related to the assassination, more than 60 years after the event, continues to fuel suspicions of a cover-up. While national security concerns may justify some continued secrecy, the extent of the classification has seemed excessive to many observers. The cultural and political impact of the assassination has been profound and lasting. The event marked the end of what many consider to be a more innocent era in American history and contributed to a growing cynicism about government and authority that continues to influence American politics and society today. The scientific and technological analysis of the assassination evidence has become increasingly sophisticated over the years, but these advances have often raised as many questions as they have answered. Different experts, using the same evidence and similar methodologies, have reached different conclusions about fundamental aspects of the case. The role of various potential conspirators, from organized crime figures to intelligence agencies to foreign governments, has been explored extensively, but no definitive proof of a conspiracy has ever been established. The complexity of the case and the passage of time have made it increasingly difficult to determine the truth. about what happened in Dallas. The assassination of President Kennedy remains one of the most analyzed and debated events in American history. Despite decades of investigation and analysis, fundamental questions about the case remain unanswered. Was Lee Harvey Oswald the lone assassin, as the Warren Commission concluded, or was he part of a larger conspiracy, as suggested by the House Select Committee on Assassinations? Were there other gunmen in Dealey Plaza, as many witnesses believed, or were these reports the result of confusion and misperception in the chaos following the shooting? The evidence in the case is voluminous, but often contradictory. The physical evidence, including the alleged murder weapon and the bullets recovered from the scene, supports the conclusion that Oswald was involved in the assassination, but questions remain about whether he acted alone. The medical evidence is problematic, with the original autopsy being conducted under less than ideal circumstances, and crucial evidence subsequently disappearing. The witness testimony is extensive, but often conflicting, with different witnesses reporting different numbers of shots from different directions. The photographic evidence, including the famous Zapruder film, provides a visual record of the assassination, but has been interpreted in different ways by different analysts. The various investigations into the assassination have reached different conclusions, with some finding evidence of a conspiracy and others concluding that Oswald acted alone. The fact that government investigators could not agree on this fundamental question has contributed to ongoing public skepticism about the official narrative. The passage of time has made it increasingly difficult to resolve the remaining questions about the assassination. Key witnesses have died, evidence has been lost or destroyed, and memories have faded. The classification of government documents has prevented researchers from accessing potentially crucial information, though the gradual release of some documents has provided new insights into the case. The assassination of President Kennedy continues to fascinate and perplex researchers, historians, and the general public. The case has become a symbol of the complexity of historical truth and the difficulty of determining what really happened in politically charged situations. Whether the full truth about the assassination will ever be known remains an open question, but the search for answers continues, driven by the belief that the American people deserve to know what happened to their president on that tragic day in Dallas. The legacy of November 22, 1963, extends far beyond the immediate tragedy of a president's death. The assassination fundamentally changed American society, contributing to a loss of innocence and a growing skepticism about official narratives that continues to influence American politics and culture today. The questions raised by the assassination about the nature of truth, the reliability of government institutions, and the possibility of conspiracy in high places remain relevant and important more than 6 decades after the event. In the end, the assassination of President Kennedy serves as a reminder of the fragility of democratic institutions and the importance of transparency and accountability in government. Whether Oswald acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy, the event demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most powerful leaders and the need for constant vigilance in protecting democratic values and institutions. The ongoing debate about the assassination reflects broader questions about truth, power, and accountability that are central to the functioning of a democratic society.